Physics him!
Greetings and welcome to the BlastCast. I am Jarvis. With me as always is the Master of Physics, Lightning Dragon.
I think that's you.
Well, I treat physics much like Superman treats bullets, you know, so it's all good.
You just ignore them.
Basically. So before we get into the Star Citizen news, I just want to let you know that I'm going to be releasing the BlastCast a bit later on Tuesday. Typically, I've been releasing my other videos at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and I kind of want to move the BlastCast to that. It'll give me a bit more time to do editing at night, so I'm not quite as rushed. Hopefully I can do more interesting edits when the situation requires it. So what we're going to talk about this week is, of course, the fact that 3.3.5 is now out on the PTU. The Around the Verse, just a touch into the Reverse the Verse, and of course calling all devs. And lastly, we want to go over the way we feel about the current state of the live version of 3.3. So let's get into this Star Citizen news. Obviously, 3.3.5 is now out on the PTU. I have been to Loreville. The first two attempts went rather poorly. First one was a crash to desktop and I couldn't get a recovery. And it's a 12-minute trip out there from Port Olisar. So the second time, I discovered what a red zone looks like. As basically I flew through with my terrapin and the ship exploded and then I fell to the ground. They're kind of hard to see. You just kind of have to be aware of this flashing thing that shows up once in a while. You'll get used to it. But the third time, I had to park outside the city gates because I have no idea how to approach this thing. And I ran into the city, did some exploration. And I'll leave some of that footage running here in the background so you can kind of see. Now, I got about 15 to 20 frames a second with OBS running. So if OBS wasn't on, it probably been closer to 25 or 30 without OBS. But bear in mind, I am running a 980 Ti, so my PC is 3 years old. It probably needs an upgrade at this point in time, but to be frank about this, I'm not going to be upgrading my PC until we get really close to release because I want to have the best possible machine I can to do proper content once the game goes to live. Obviously, there'll be more optimizations coming. This is a first string release, and these are typically always the least stable, the most buggy, and, well, every player was packed in around that city, so that probably didn't help a lot either, because we currently don't have the server-side OCS, and every ship that was out there piling around that city on the outskirts was probably not helping the frame rate too much. Still looks great, though, and it's not bad for a first pass, and I really, really like the train.
Choo-choo!
So Around the Verse was just a little bit different this week. It was kind of Sandy was playing devil's advocate. She was challenging Chris and asking, well, you could perceive it as relatively hostile questions about the delays about what's being pushed back to 3.5, which is, of course, the flight model, female characters, and Art Corp. Now, this doesn't bother me too much. First of all, by adding the new planets and the new moons, they have, effectively speaking, doubled the amount of area that you can mess around in, not counting the space in between, of course, and all the extra truck stops. Having the extra time to have that flight model revisited, worked on, modified, and refined is only going to be a good thing. I'd rather have the extra time to get this model in a more, obviously not finished state, because this could take a while to do that, probably 6 months after that comes out, probably 2 more builds. But when Star Citizen came out, they had a handful of ships to try to set up a flight model with. And now we're in the 130s or 140s now. Mr. Coulson's got his work cut out for him. Because of that, the extra time, I feel, would only be a good thing. On Reverse the Verse this week, it was mostly about the art of Loreville, the reason they made the walls, the lighting choices, everything, the environmental stuff. It's more of an artistic / technical kind of video, not really a lot of news in there for me to delve into, but if you're interested in that kind of thing, I do recommend checking it out. So before we get into the state of 3.3, let's get into the calling all devs. Now, first question I thought was really interesting. It was asked, how do you envision removing players from our ships that are not willing to leave on their own? And anyone who's been on the Persistent Universe is keenly aware of this problem.
Oh, yes.
Well, one of the things they want to make clear is that the player will be the law on their ship. As the law on your ship, you can mark individuals that will be required to leave that ship. And a timer is one of the options they're exploring, is a timer could be set. And if the person doesn't leave the ship by that point in time, they can be shot. Now, for those people who are AFK and they may want to quote unquote abuse that system, if they're on a port or if you arrive at a port, you've marked them for removal, they will be teleported. This is once again initially the thought process is that they can be teleported to like the way it is right now. If you park too long on a pad or they need to move your ship, same kind of thing. And they would just find themselves in a habitation unit. But they don't want to see people abuse this, so this particular feature, in fact, even the timer might only work when you're docked. The reason for this is they were bringing up the Genesis Starliner. Like, you could fill up the entire hold with passengers and then just tell them all to leave in the middle of space, and you can kill them all and then take their stuff or whatever. There can be ways to abuse this. Yeah, so they want to basically kind of hash out the details. Having any sort of authority on your own ship and not getting a criminal penalty because you're shooting some guy who's, boarding your ship and is trying to cause harm to you, that's going to be a big deal. They also asked that because we have voice and face over IP now, if we're going to integrate something like voice attack into the game. Now, I remember them saying that this is something they were looking into a while ago, or at least were interested in. This is something they still want to pursue. I don't think they're going to be working with Voice Attack Company, so I'm curious to see. I have their product, and I've used it before with Star Citizen. I've done videos on it. I currently don't use it because the controls seem to change all the time, and I'm just kind of waiting for things to settle into their pace, and hopefully they'll release like a final version. But if this turns out to be the case, well, this could also hurt their bottom line too. They're a third-party developer. I mean, the risks were always there, and it still works for my, my Elite Dangerous if I ever play that again. But the point is that that may not even be a requirement anymore, at least if you want to use something like that. Another question was, how do you intend to reconcile the idea of death scramble races with, of course, the death of a spaceman mechanic? Because they seem to be in opposition to one another. Well, they stated that the death versions are the Tier 0 implementation. They also want to have ones that are non-lethal, and they want to work on the mechanics of that. They also want to have official tracks, but they can't do them right now because the planets are still in development, they're in flux, things change. Once the planets get closer to a finished product, they'll go back and possibly even make, tracks with roads or whatever. We'll have to see how that goes, but it's going to be a while before we get to that point. They did mention, as a side effect of these races, that there's potential meta jobs that can be involved in that. For example, if you're a medic, you might be hired to be on site to do rescue if someone gets injured on the race. Maybe you're a salvager. You can go out there picking the parts of the post-pod race destruction. But meta jobs can pop up around these things that you can take advantage of. So let's go ahead and jump into our thoughts about the current state of 3.3. And no, this doesn't count the PTU 3.3.5. We're just getting to what's considered to be live right now. So this weekend, since it went live, I was able to take my brother, Captain Tyler, and Lightning Dragon out, and we just basically went out to test the performance of the game and just let chaos ensue. We just wanted to let happen whatever happened, to get a general idea of how things are. Obviously, flight is still terrible, and all the things around that. So we were more interested in taking a ground vehicle out and having fun with that. And you've already seen the preview of how we landed with that particular vehicle early on in this particular video. So Lightning, how did you feel about it?
One of the things that surprised me the most is when I first started into the game, it put me into Olisar, the main spaceport, and I was getting 60 FPS there when I barely ever got above 30. Now, I don't think there was anyone else there. I think everyone was on in different areas. But that surprised me because it's never run good.
No, it's always been very poor.
But immediately after that, because I summoned up my Hornet Ghost to meet up with you and Tyler, now that I'm getting high frame rate, it just made the flight feel so much worse. And it was really hard to ignore that while we were playing, but the game, it ran amazing. And another thing to point out is I recently upgraded my computer, not recently, but within a few years. And I used to be AMD for a long time because you could get an AMD a whole lot cheaper, and I've always been kind of strapped for cash. But this last time we went all out, and I got a i7 something something. So I've got pretty good single core performance. And Tyler, your brother, he's still on AMD. I think his computer is a little long in the tooth now. And he's had incredible performance problems with Star Citizen to the point where the game would just crash and not recover. He couldn't get back in. And he never had any problems. and he was even getting up to 50 FPS when we were down on the planet and
Yeah,
some of
50
the
plus.
space flight. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was really nice for him. He actually, he enjoyed it. You brought up an interesting point too about how you could feel how much worse the flight was once you had the game running at a good performance rate. And this is, while I understand that the flight hasn't really changed too much. One of the things we talked about a lot in the show is that if the performance in the persistent universe wasn't more consistent, that it would be impossible to do any meaningful tests on changes in flight or anything else, because you'd have to be pushing through all that, the lag, the latency, the frame rate issues, and it'd be really hard to get a feel for whatever's out there. But now with these performance changes, you could feel it more clearly. It didn't feel any better. In fact, it felt worse, but I would expect that with this particular current iteration on flight. It did have a difference in the way that you perceive things.
Because we had pretty consistent performance, the high 60s or high 50s FPS, I noticed the latency issues a lot. Ships would stop responding. And before, it was probably always there, but because you were in like sub 30s or 40s at the extreme best, I don't think you noticed it as much.
Yeah, it's more present now, but this will be good for testing the upcoming changes. So let's go ahead and talk about the Valkyrie a little bit. There's been still a lot of controversy about it, about the fact that it can't carry cargo, and for the large part, I agree with the sentiment there. That, for starters, I don't see the logic of the fact that it can hold a vehicle somehow and hold it in place while being inverted and all that, but it can't hold a box. So there's a special magnet that only holds rubber and a magnet that won't hold. I don't get it. To me, it's like some people say, "Oh, you got the Cutlass and stuff like that." Well, let's look at the price of the Valkyrie versus something like the Cutlass. It's significantly more. Let's just start with that. It requires more people to operate the vehicle as well. It's not only a matter of just being for troop deployment. These kind of vehicles are also used for retrieval in the military. You could be going in to pick up a squad. Oh, you're picking up a platoon of troops and a vehicle to have with them, and maybe some cargo that they left behind too, or whatever, or something they're bringing back with them. They don't need to go in and redesign the interior of the ship. They just need to add a cargo grid. A simple cargo grid. It could be under the floor. It's magnets. It doesn't need to have like a clear, transparent glass grid-looking thing underneath it to make it work. Anvil doesn't seem to be that kind of company anyway. They should put something in there, because it doesn't make sense in any regards to do what they've done with that. As far as, I like the ship. It's well designed. It's awesome. But the lack of cargo is just pathetic, and it's a bad design, and they have no logical reason not to have it. So, and also they need to do something about the upper balcony, because that upper balcony, the fact that you have beds right next to an area that can be vented into space is dumb. You need to have either glass there so you can look down, if that's what they still want to be able to look down, seal it off, and have either a little elevator, an airlocked elevator that goes from up in the top to the lower level, or have a solid door there that slides closed. But that top area needs to be sealed, because you can't tell me that you have beds there with blankets and pillows and all it takes is someone opening up the back and everyone dies. No, bad design. So those two things being addressed in the ways that I described. If you want to keep the ability to look down at the bay, just do what you did in the Hammerhead window right there. You can still do it, and take care of that ladder issue however you want to do to seal it off, and you're good. Because the soldiers even get sealed up, because they got those doors that close in front of the cargo area too.
The funny part is, well, you and I both agree, even just a basic like glass or transparent aluminum or whatever their in-lore thing is, it would solve a lot of the problems, but it would also have like lens flare all over it. You'd be blind. You wouldn't be able to see through it.
That's true. They do like their lens flare and reflections, of course.
Oh.
We also took a trip to take a look at the ship store. Now, for example, the Prospector is 1.6 million. The average mission award in the persistent universe is about 460, and that's going to take you about a half an hour to do. It doesn't take a lot of math to figure out that 460 credits into 1.6 million and a half an hour per, that's got to be thousands of hours to get a ship. I'm not saying they need to lower the price of the ships. I'm just saying that maybe the rewards need to be looked at, especially the combat missions. I find it odd that a combat mission can often make very similar to the amount of money you make for delivering a box. It's like the UPS man gets paid the same as the Blackwater mercenary. I don't see that as being a thing. So I can understand where a non-combat mission may pay less, but at the very least ramp up something or add a 0 to all of it. Part of the reason is that we're testing things, and what's the point of having the ship shop if you can play for 1,000 hours and with, you know, if you have an Aurora and you still can't do anything with it. Plus, you have the persistent server wipes, so are you really going to be willing to put that kind of time in? To accurately test their mechanic, they need to just do something about this. I mean, when you think about it as well, just the cost of, say, like a handgun or the price of armor, all those things alone, you have to do several missions just to be able to cover those basic items.
Not to mention like med pens or stims or something like that.
Yeah, and refueling and repairs, all that. It just feels that you're getting pennies compared to what you should be getting paid. But you know, those are the negative things, and some of them, of course, with the Valkyrie, not really specific to the 3.3 in and of itself. It's just kind of a note I wanted to throw in. Overall, I think 3.3 is a success. There are a few bugaboos, but that's what feedback is for. That's what we're doing here. We're saying, hey, this might need to be addressed. That's it. No hostility on that. Economy needs to be worked out. Flight model, that's 3.5. But overall, much better experience, and I'd like to thank CIG for getting us to where we are, and I look forward to seeing where we are by 3.5. So later this week, I'm going to be covering a game that I was given a review key for called Frontier Pilot Simulator. And I had Lightning watch me play for a while and laugh at me continuously.
It was pretty hilarious.
It was a good time, though. And I'm going to be showing off the initial reaction videos, kind of cutting to the highlights over the next couple weeks. And there's actually been a significant amount of updates for the game since we even recorded, including changes to the HUD, and an upcoming change where they're actually going to be adding a cockpit view, from what I understand, which would have been one of my major complaints, if anything, as far as what I would have wanted for the game. So hopefully I can get to that point where I can show you some of these new updates too. So we're going to do initial reactions, and then when these updates start coming out, I want to show you a little bit more of that, and then I want to give you a kind of a review at the end of it of basically whether or not I think you should get it, or what you should expect if you're looking at getting it. We did have fun. Lightning had more fun laughing at me than anything else, as I said.
It's interesting. I think from what I've seen, the only thing I could say that more map stuff. That's really all I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah. I mean, we only played a couple hours, so it's really hard to form an opinion after that. Yeah, I still think I was very much on the tutorial island. So, and of course, later this week we'll be continuing our bi-weekly beating in Arma 3 Apex. And as always, leave your comments and suggestions down below, and we will catch you on the next one. Bye-bye, everybody.